The German machine gun nest was cutting us to pieces, and I watched 3 of my boys drop in 10 seconds. Before realizing someone had to do something or we'd all be dead within the next minute. We were pinned down in a shallow ditch near Carentan, France, on June 12, 1944. And the MG-42 was spitting out 1,200 rounds per minute from a fortified position 50 yards ahead. I was 19 years old, a sergeant with the 101st Airborne Division, and I had been in combat for exactly 6 days. Since jumping into Normandy on D-Day, the screaming of my wounded men mixed with the relentless hammering of that German gun. And I knew if I didn't move right now, every single one of us would die in that French ditch without ever seeing home again. So I grabbed 2 grenades from my belt, looked at the 8 men still alive in my squad, and yelled over the gunfire that I was going to flank right through the hedgerow while they laid down covering fire. 30 seconds later, I was crawling through mud and grass with my heart pounding so hard I thought the Germans would hear it. I'm 96 years old now, and people call me a hero for what happened that day in Carentan, but I'll tell you the truth, I've never told anyone before. I was absolutely terrified. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped both grenades. And the only reason I kept moving forward was because I was more afraid of letting my men die than I was of dying myself. Before I tell you about Carentan and that machine gun nest, you need to understand how I got there. I grew up in San Diego, California, where my biggest worry was whether I'd have enough money to take a girl to the movies on Saturday night. I enlisted on November 17, 1940, at Fort Rosecrans, because the world was going to hell and I figured America would soon be in the fight. What followed were 18 brutal months of training that transformed me from a California kid into a paratrooper with the 101st Airborne Division. They sent us to Camp Toccoa in Georgia first, where the physical training was so intense that grown men would collapse during runs. Then came airborne school at Fort Benning, where they taught us to jump out of perfectly good airplanes and survive the landing. By the spring of 1944, I had earned my sergeant stripes and was commanding a 12-man squad in Company C, 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment. Most of my boys were even younger than me, fresh-faced kids who'd never been in a real fight, and I was responsible for keeping them alive when we finally went into combat. On June 5, 1944, we got our orders at Merrifield Airfield in England, and General Eisenhower himself came to see us off before we boarded our planes. When he shook my hand and told me good luck, I realized that in less than 12 hours I would either be fighting Germans in France or I would be dead. Our C-47 transport plane roared to life at exactly 11:30 p.m. on June 5th, and as I climbed aboard with 17 fellow paratroopers, each carrying more than 100 pounds of equipment, I felt the weight of what we were about to do. Inside that aircraft, it was dark and cramped and loud, with the smell of aviation fuel mixed with the sweat of terrified young men. The flight across the English Channel started smooth, but the moment we crossed the French coastline, everything changed. German anti-aircraft fire erupted from below like a volcano of death, with tracer rounds in green and red and white streaking past our windows. And each explosion from the flak guns rocked our plane violently. Through the open door, I watched the C-47 next to us take a direct hit from an 88mm shell, and the next it was just a ball of fire tumbling toward the dark countryside. When the green light came on and the jumpmaster screamed, "Go, go, go," I threw myself out that door into the chaos of D-Day. The moment I jumped, I was hit by a wall of sound unlike anything I had ever experienced, with explosions and machine gun fire and screams, creating a symphony of destruction from every direction. The propeller blast spun me around like a rag doll until my parachute opened, and suddenly I was floating through a war zone in complete darkness. I couldn't see the ground or sky, only fires burning across the countryside. A German bullet ripped through my parachute with a sharp snap, but I kept falling and kept praying. When I hit the ground, it was with such force that my ankle twisted and pain shot up my leg. Though the adrenaline was so intense, I barely registered it. I cut away my harness, pulled out my rifle. I realized I had no idea where I was and that I was completely alone in Nazi-occupied France. And then I saw a German soldier running toward me through the hedgerow with his rifle raised. I shot that German soldier without hesitation and watched him fall, and then I vomited into the French soil, because I had just killed another human being for the first time in my life. After I finished being sick, I started moving, because staying in one place in a combat zone is the fastest way to get yourself killed. For the next 6 hours, I wandered through the darkness of the Norman countryside, using the little metal cricket clicker that we'd all been issued to try and find other American paratroopers. The system was simple in theory. 1 click meant you were friendly, and 2 clicks back meant the other person was friendly too, but in practice it was terrifying. Finally, just before dawn, I clicked and heard 2 clicks back, and a voice whispered the password "Thunder" in the darkness, and I responded "Flash," and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. The group consisted of Lieutenant Jansen and about 8 other paratroopers from different units, all scattered by the chaos and now trying to link up with our objectives. By June 12th, we had been fighting continuously for 6 days, pushing toward Carentan, which connected Utah and Omaha beaches. My squad had been reduced from 12 men to 8 through casualties, and we were all exhausted and running on nothing but adrenaline. We were advancing through the hedgerows when the German MG-42 machine gun opened up from 50 yards ahead, and the sound of that weapon is something I'll never forget. 3 of my boys went down in the first 10 seconds. The rest of us dove into a shallow ditch that provided barely any cover. We would all be dead. I grabbed 2 fragmentation grenades and told my men to lay down covering fire while I flanked right through the hedgerow. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped both grenades as I crawled through the mud, knowing 8 men were counting on me. It took about 3 minutes to work around to the side of the German position, though it felt like 3 hours. And when I got close enough, I pulled the pins and threw both grenades into that machine gun nest with every ounce of strength I had. The explosion silenced the MG-42 immediately. My squad moved forward and secured the position. And that's when my lieutenant put me in for a Bronze Star, even though I was just a terrified 19-year-old kid who didn't want to watch his friends die. What nobody tells you about D-Day is that for us paratroopers, it was 74 continuous days of combat with no relief. After Carentan, we kept fighting through the Norman hedgerows where every field was a death trap and Germans could be hiding 20 feet away invisible until they opened fire. The nights were worse because German infiltrators would slip through to cut throats and toss grenades, which meant you could never sleep. We were constantly hungry because K rations ran out after the first week, constantly thirsty drinking water from streams that gave us dysentery. By mid-July, when we were finally pulled out, my company had 60% casualties. Of my 12-man squad, only 4 walked out. Private Johnson died in my arms from a sniper on D+3. Corporal Williams stepped on a mine, and we couldn't find all of him. Private Rodriguez was killed by friendly fire on D+21. The division suffered 4,670 casualties total. I'm 96 years old now, and in 2019, I went back to Normandy and jumped again at 89 with a tandem instructor and an American flag. The French people cheered and thanked us. But all I could think about were the boys who never came home. People call me a hero for Carentan, and the Army gave me a Bronze Star. But I wasn't brave. I was just more afraid of letting my men die. The real heroes are buried in those French fields or whose names are on memorial walls. After the war, I taught history for 44 years so young people would understand what freedom costs. I raised 5 children and wrote Trial by Combat so people would know what really happened in those 74 days. Freedom isn't free. It's paid for in blood and sacrifice by 19-year-old boys who jump into hell and many never come home. We did it so you wouldn't have to, so your children could grow up without having to storm beaches or watch their friends die. I'm one of the last ones left, and soon we'll all be gone and no one will remember what D-Day was really like. Remember us. Remember what we did and what it cost. Remember Private Johnson, Corporal Williams, Private Rodriguez, and the thousands whose names are on memorial walls. On June 6, 1944, I was falling through darkness with a bullet hole in my parachute, scared but determined. I survived when so many didn't. Tell their story and remember what freedom costs.